Okay, students, this is the last lecture of the week 12, and we are at the end of this course, that is the guidance and counseling. We have discussed all the 60 lectures with you. I will give a brief summary of that at the end of this lecture. But in this lecture, we are going to discuss one more approach of evaluation that is most sophisticated, and that is the experimental studies approach of evaluation. Now let us understand this experimental studies approach with the help of the introduction. The experimental method is a systematic and scientific research approach used to establish a cause and effect relationship between variables. By the manipulating one or more independent variables and observing their effects on the dependent variable under carefully controlled conditions. This method is considered the most robust, most valid for determining causality. What is the cause or how independent variable is impacting on the performance of the students? That is basically the cause and effect relationship. One is the cause and another is the effect. Cause is basically related to the individual. I will explain that. Experimental research methods are those employed to describe, compare, and analyze data under controlled conditions. These experimental researches are basically associated with the laboratory researches which are used in the field of the sciences. But in social sciences, we are also using the experimental methods and exercising control on the variables. But we are definitely running short in controlling the variables because there are so many compounding or intervening variables which becomes very difficult to control on the part of the researcher or evaluator of the program, as we do in creating the physical conditions in the uh, in the in the science field. Here there are certain drawbacks or limitations using this program in social sciences, because counseling is associated to the human beings, and it is very difficult to control all the variables which are related to the human beings. The experimental studies approach, also known as scientific method, is a rigorous way of evaluating the guidance and counseling program by randomly assigning participants to different groups. One is experimental group and another is control group, and comparing the outcomes. In counseling, the experimental group is often used when evaluating specific interventions such as particular therapeutic approach or a new counseling technique. There are many counseling techniques, and we are implementing any one of the counseling technique on any particular group. That is basically the experimental group. And the control group is by controlling variables, and the control group is that where we are not inducing the element of the counseling. By controlling variables and eliminating external influences, evaluators can isolate the effects of intervening or intermediate variables, offering the most reliable evidence about its efficacy. So, importance and significance of the experimental research basically associated to its controlling the variables. There are certain key aspects of an experimental evaluation. Independent variable, the variable that is manipulated or changed by the researcher to see its effect, it is caustic. For example, there are three counseling techniques: directive, non-directive, and eclectic counseling technique. So these are basically the variables, and we are using the group method technique, career counseling. If we are talking about the group methods, there are different independent variables associated to that. Dependent variable is the variable that is measured to see it is affected by the independent variable. So these counseling sessions have an impact on the change of in the behavior and many other aspects. If the change is reflected because of this intervention, we have to use the experimental studies. There are certain intervening variables, and intervening variables is a hypothetical, unobservable variable that acts as a mediator to explain the causal relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. Here we can understand with the help of another example. Independent variable, the number of counseling sessions a student receives, that is the independent variable, that is the intervention. And what is the result of it? That is the dependent variable. Means a student's academic performance has improved because of intervention. It means this independent variable has a causative impact on changing the dependent variable, that is the academic performance. If by counseling sessions the ability to take better decisions has developed, it means independent variable is exercising or related causing the dependent variable to happen. Intervening variable, the student's motivation or self-esteem. When we are giving a counseling session to the student, in order to see its impact, another variable are also related, which are hypothetical variable, and it is very difficult to control them. Take for example motivation. There are two students, some students who are motivated, who are having better self-esteem. So this better motivation, intrinsic motivation or self-motivation, it itself is causing the impact. So we try to control this intervening variable in whatever capacity we can do, although it is very difficult to control. That is why there is a difference between the social sciences researchers and the researches which are conducted in the purely experimental situations. Key aspects of an experimental evaluation are experimental group, the group that receive the treatment or the manipulation of the independent variable. Take for example, we have assigned to divided two groups. One group is exposed to the counseling session, another group is not exposed to the counseling. That is called the control group. The group that does not receive the treatment or receives a placebo serving as a baseline for comparison. Random assignments. What is random assignment? Random assignment means participants are randomly assigned to either to the experimental group who are receiving the intervention or the control group not receiving the intervention. Control group serves as a baseline to compare against experimental group. We consider control group, we are not giving any intervention, that is basically considered the baseline. Take for example, after counseling educational guidance, we are basically evaluating the performance of the student in terms of their achievement. So we will see the comparison of a group of students who were not given counseling session or guidance session yeah, in the beginning, and another group who was exposed to the counseling and guidance session. What is the difference between the academic achievement of these two? If we find there is an academic in a difference in the academic achievement of these two groups, then we can evaluate the random assignment or the interventions which we have given to the individual have its impact. Measurable outcome. The study should have clear measurable objectives that allow for comparison between the groups. Control of variables is also very important. It is a key aspect of the experimental evaluation. The researcher aims to control or account for extraneous variables that could influence the outcome, ensuring the intervention is a primary factor. Another key aspects of an experimental situation is that, or evaluation is that, pre and post test. Evaluators measure relevant outcomes, academic performance, social emotional well-being before and after the program to track changes. This is also another format of the pre and post test. First of all, we are taking the test of the academic performance in the beginning and their social and emotional well-being. We are conducting the test of these two aspects, and we are exposing the student to the guidance and counseling sessions. And after conducting several sessions, now we are collecting the academic, evaluating the academic achievement or performance as well as emotional and social well-being of the student. What will be the difference between the pre-test and the final test? That basically will determine the impact of the program on the academic achievement and social emotional well-being of the students. Data collection is also an important aspect of experimental evaluation. Methods like survey, interviews, observations are used together, both qualitative and quantitative data about the program's impact. These are not only the methods, we have discussed a number of methods. It depends upon the evaluator of the program what tools and techniques may be used in order to keep in mind the objectives of the research on objectives of the evaluation, because any evaluation program is done on the basis of certain objectives. So what objective we have decided in the beginning, definitely we will try to use the student appraisal techniques related to that. Data analysis is also very important. Statistical methods are used to analyze the collected data and determine if there are significant differences between the treatment and the control group. Two groups are there. We have given the treatment to the one group and we have not given treatment or counseling to the another group. If the impact is seen on the performance of the group which were given counseling session, it basically gives the impact of that program that is basically related to the data analysis. There are certain steps which are involved in experimental evaluation. First of all, define goals and objectives, develop evaluation plan, and randomly assign participants, and collect baseline data, and collect follow-up data, and then report findings. These are 7 aspects which are here and they must be taken into consideration by the researcher or evaluator of the program. Define goals and objectives. As I told you, in experimental evaluation, goals and objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. In a short term, we can say SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Ensuring they are clear, focused, realistic, and provide a clear path for data collection, analysis, and evaluation of the outcomes. So, defining the goals and the objectives basically the most important and significant aspect of the evaluation. What we are going to evaluate, we must be very much clear in the terminology or definition of the objectives. They should also be interrelated with goals. Defining the broad purpose and objectives outline the specific steps to achieve that purpose. Okay, they must be clearly written and achievable, realistic goal which can be achieved and which are basically giving the exact result. Develop evaluation program. Whatever objectives you have set in the beginning, definitely we are going to plan our strategy of evaluation accordingly. Design the research study including participant recruitment, data collection methods, and analysis plan. All the plans must be clear in the minds of the researcher because we are evaluating the effectiveness of the program or utility of the program. If you are not making the better planning, then there is a possibility that we are not having the reliable results. Number third is randomly assign participants. Random assignment is highly important in the experimental researches. Random assignment means every participant has an equal chance to be selected in the group. Random selection is an experimental evaluation, gives every subject an equal chance of being chosen, minimizing biases, ensuring a representative sample, and allowing for generalizable results to be the larger population. So, random selection of the candidate is highly important. We should not use purposive sampling method, rather random assignment, random selection of the subject is important. That is basically the basic requirement of the experimental evaluation. Key characteristics include a known probability of selection, comparability of group through random assignments to treatment or control, and ability to attribute outcomes to the intervention rather than confounding variables. So we have to find strategies where we can use random assignment method in uh, comparing, in taking two groups for the purpose of control group and experimental group. Random assignments is very important. If the researcher is using the purposive sampling method, then never consider, or it can never be considered as an experimental evaluation. Collect baseline data. Gather data on relevant outcomes before the program begins. The data may be of two types: quantitative data and qualitative data. And there are tools related to that. Okay, we can find out the data. Involves numerical values. Quantitative data involves numerical values such as test scores, weight measurements, or other quantifiable indicators of the current state. Qualitative data includes non-numerical data from observations, surveys, interviews, or case studies that describe the context or current experiences. Fifth aspect related to it is that deliver, implement the program. So after collecting the base data, now we are implementing the program. Deliver the guidance and counseling program to the treatment group in order to see the impact of the program on selected personality variables of the clients. You cannot find out the program's impact on all the personality aspects of the individual. Definitely, evaluation or the researches are conducted by taking certain variables. Take for example, you are taking the some personality measures, means enhance self-esteem, adjustment, career choices, academic achievement, and development of the coping strategies or the skill. These 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, whatever measures, personality measures are taken, or personality variables are taken in order to see the impact of that program. Collect follow-up data. After conducting the program, the next stage is to collect the data. Gather data on the same outcomes after the program has been implemented in order to get better insight about the outcome. You have used the sample and conducted the counseling session, and now you are evaluating the performance by using the same data, by using the same pupil appraisal techniques, and we are comparing the results, pre-test results and post-test results. That is basically the analyze the data. To compare the outcomes of the treatment and control groups, to determine the program's effectiveness, appropriate statistical techniques can be utilized to analyze the data if the data is present in quantitative form. Steps involved in experimental evaluation, and the last stage is basically related to the report findings. Share the results of the evaluation with the stakeholders, which includes teachers, parents, school administrators, counselors, and concerned government agencies for needed interventions. Here again we need to understand that we have to provide the collective data and we should not share the individual data, because the objective is basically to improve the entire program, and if we are providing data of any related candidate, then it will be against the principles of the uh, um, ethical principle. It will be against the ethical principles involved in conducting the evaluation or the researches. So, we have discussed experimental method in detail. We have tried to understand, okay, first of all, uh, we have to select the goals and the objectives, and then we have to develop a plan and randomly assign participants and dividing them into control and the experimental group, and then we are collecting the base data, and after implementing the program. After implementing the program, we are again collecting the data in order to see the difference between the previous test scores and the final test scores. That is basically related to the analysis aspect, and then we are reporting the findings. So after completing all the steps, that is reporting the finding, there are certain limitations of experimental method. First one is complexity. The experimental method can be complicated to implement, requiring careful planning, randomization and monitoring to ensure that the results are valid and reliable. It is a very complex process. First of all, we should know the principle of randomness, and then we are collecting the group and we are giving the information, we are controlling certain variables, and we are conducting the evaluation. So it is really a complex uh, task to conduct this research. Artificial setting, as I said in the beginning, okay, we are basically implementing the experimental method in a situation which is social in nature. So we are creating artificial setting. Take for example, the structured and controlled nature of the experiment may not be fully reflect the complexities of the real world counseling settings, limiting the generalizability of the result. We are creating the situations under control conditions in order to provide the counseling session. However, it is the basic principles the counselor must feel, or the client must feel free, and there should not be any conditions or any control aspects related to that. So if you are creating the experimental situations, then we are creating a artificial setting, and in artificial setting there is a possibility students may not give the appropriate responses and they will not expose to many ideas related to that. For instance, the presence of researchers or specific protocols might influence participant behavior, making it difficult to generalize findings. Ethical concerns are also involved here. In some cases, it may be ethically difficult to create a control group that does not receive the intervention, especially when the counseling is expected to be beneficial for vulnerable individuals. Okay, we are giving counseling to one group of students and we are not giving counseling to the another students, and we are making the comparison on this group. For example, denying a potentially helpful counseling program to a group of students due to experimental design could raise ethical questions about their well-being. Subjectivity many times is also associated to this program. Many outcomes in guidance and counseling, such as emotional well-being or self-esteem, are subjective and difficult to quantify. This can lead to reliance on reported data or evaluation by others, which may be vary greatly and lack objectivity. So many outcomes in guidance and counseling program, the example is cited in this slide, emotional well-being or self-esteem are subjective and difficult to quantify. It is very difficult to quantify because we are using certain tests, and there is always subjectivity related to that because these are the abstract concepts. Resource constraints. Conducting experimental evaluation can be resource intensive, requiring time, funding, and personnel. Schools or organizations may face limitations in these areas, making it difficult to conduct comprehensive and rigorous evaluation. So experimental situations are basically the situations where we need infrastructure, adequate infrastructure, because we are controlling the variables and we need expert people associated to that. So these resource constraints also uh, create a negative impact on our experimental evaluation program of the guidance and counseling. So these aspects should also be taken into consideration. Lack of generalizability, although if we compare the other methods of evaluation, this method, experimental method, is supposed to be the most rigorous and most reliable method among all the methods. Still, it cannot be 100% reliable because we are dealing with the human beings. As I said several times in my discussion, in dealing with the human beings, there is always an element of the subjectivity, because human beings are given by the God a very important attribute, that is the intelligence, and we use intelligence for manipulation purposes. For example, a study conducted in a specific school with a particular student population might not be applicable to other schools with different demographics. So generalization is also related to the limited generalization is there, because you have used some experimental situation, and these experimental situation cannot be applied to the entire population. Situations in the one schools may not be applicable to the another schools. Now let us conclude our discussion. Despite these challenges, the experimental method remains one of the most reliable way to assess the effectiveness of the specific counseling intervention. Its scientific nature allows evaluators to provide evidence-based recommendations for improving programs and achieving better outcomes. If we analyze the whole aspects of the evaluation, then we can say, okay, if we take the example of the case studies, interrelated studies, and correlational studies, and survey studies, then we will find these experimental researches are more relevant and provides better result, and because they actually deals with cause and effect relationship. So this is very important. But when we are going to conduct the experimental researches, we need to take into consideration various aspects. Various aspects. What are these aspects? Need expert people, need interpretation of the results, needs how to take the samples, how to make randomized groups, how to make control group, and finally we are uh, having many other aspects like the expertise on the part of the counselor and the researcher. So there are challenges, but ultimately we are able to deal these changes if we take little care about this. Let us evaluate our entire journey, which we started in the beginning, and this is the last lecture of this discussion, the very important topic, that the guidance and counseling. I congratulate you all for successfully completing this course entitled Guidance and Counseling. During our interaction of 12 weeks duration, comprising 60 lectures, we try to understand the need and principles of educational, social, personal, and vocational guidance at school level and at university level. Counseling and its various approaches were also examined or explained in detail, along with the roles of the family, community, teachers, and administrators in its successful implementation. A detailed description of all the pupil appraisal techniques including standardized and non-standardized, was also done. Later on, organization of the guidance and counseling program at school level was also discussed. Guidance needs of the student with special education needs were also taken into consideration. And finally, strategies of evaluation of guidance and counseling services were elaborated. Thus, the course was quite comprehensive and covered almost all major domains of it. Take for example, we started our discussion with the concept of understanding the guidance and counseling. We learned various types of the guidance: educational, vocational, social, and emotional. And we also talked about the vocational information. We also talked about various kinds of the counseling processes for which can be used in individual counseling, in group counseling. We talked about uh, in length about various pupil appraisal techniques. So this is a comprehensive approach we have taken. Here, one thing we need to understand in providing the counseling, first of all, we need to understand the characteristic features of the students and the opportunities available in the environment, and there must be a correlation between these characteristic features and the opportunities available in the environment. That is basically the conclusion of the guidance and counseling. Hope the course will be highly useful to you all, not only in acquiring knowledge but also changing your attitudes to understand the significance of guidance in achieving the objectives of education. My good wishes to you all. God bless you all. Thank you very much for your patience listening. God bless you once again.